Democratic Alliance has this morning told the High Court in the Western Cape that Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana acted unlawfully by raising the VAT hike or raising the VAT by 0.5 percentage points. Arguing on behalf of the party, Advocate Michael Bishop told the court that Parliament did not duly pass the hike. The DA wants the minister's decision interdicted and for the court to rule that Parliament's passing of the fiscal framework was indeed unlawful. For more on this, we're joined now by Newzroom Afrika's Qaanitah Hunter, who has been watching the proceedings. Qaanitah, good afternoon. We've just heard on behalf of the EFF, Advocate Tembeka Nxumalo. Perhaps we should start there with the latest things we just heard unfolding there in court. He's made similar arguments to Michael Bishop when he says that there was some deception involved in how the budget and the fiscal framework were passed.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's go back to that committee meeting that's under contention now, that essentially Parliament Committee on Finance met, and there was this conversation around passing the fiscal framework with a proposal by Action SA that Treasury would then have until the 1st of May to come up with alternative funding solutions. They said that they believed at the time that they had to pass the fiscal framework so that it resolves the budget impasse that had happened. But there was a lot of confusion about whether it was an amendment, whether it was an endorsement of the fiscal framework. And so that process, the DA called it shambolic. The EFF argued to court that it was a complete deception because there is no such thing as, according to the EFF, a recommendation afterwards. Now, what's interesting is that if you look at the court papers from the finance minister, he seemingly concedes that the recommendation by Action SA has no bearing on this process and that VAT will be effected on the 1st of May. And then you heard from the Speaker of the National Assembly in their court papers, and obviously the arguments will follow afterwards, is that it was a non-binding process. So what Tembeka Nxumalo is telling the court now is that politicians lie. And essentially, that was a deception that can sit in Luthuli House and can sit in the political party sphere, but cannot sit in the legislative sphere. And so what they're saying is that the passing of the fiscal framework should be completely overturned by the court and should not be effected.
Yeah, I remember even confusion in our newsrooms because we were trying to figure out how the fiscal framework would be passed with a view then of amending what the VAT hike would be.
And so the question then is about whether the minister's announcement is reversible or not. And the minister seems to concede that it is irreversible. And so there's a slight difference between the EFF's case and the DA's case. The DA went to court challenging Section 7(4) of the Tax Act, and they're saying that the minister acted unconstitutionally by announcing this increase, and said that the minister doesn't have the powers to unilaterally increase tax. The EFF says they're not making that case to the court. They're simply saying that that process that was followed in Parliament should be overturned. Now, we know the DA has two parts to its application. The first part is the urgency and the interdict of the minister's VAT increase. And then later on, they want to test the constitutionality of the VAT Act. And so that would be an interesting when it eventually gets to that. But let's hear from Advocate Michael Bishop, who argued this morning that Parliament was acting unlawfully.
Parliament has not endorsed this VAT hike. The decision that Parliament did take was an unlawful decision. And if one looks at the public statements of political parties and one counts the numbers, in both the National Assembly and the NCOP, at least at present, if the vote was taken today, the VAT hike would not pass. So I'm not saying that means when it gets in 3 months, 3 months is a long time in politics, it may be very different then. But there's at least a very good possibility that Parliament will ultimately reject this VAT hike. And that's important consideration when this court decides whether to suspend or not.
So Advocate Tembeka Nxumalo says the process of deliberation from the committee was farcical. He's made a whole range of really serious accusations here. And he says Parliament's conduct is now in question is asking for the suspension of National Assembly resolutions. How will this all work then? Let's say that the EFF's urgent interdict works and they get what they're asking the court to give them. Do we go through the budgetary process again?
Yeah, so if the report will then have to start from the beginning in the committee, go through a vote, then it gets sent back to the National Assembly for another vote, and then the process continues. And so the Finance Minister obviously saying that there's no need for that because it is above board. And it was interesting to look at the papers from Togo Didiza, the Speaker. She details to say that the flaws that the EFF and the DA are pointing to were not in fact flaws, and that they were defeated in the committee fair and square, and that the majority of that committee had voted in favour of the report. And then it was taken to Parliament, and then it was into the National Assembly, and then it was voted on there and by a majority. So the question...
But wasn't it voted on there, sorry Qaanitah, with the proviso that the VAT issue was still up for discussion?
But the Speaker says that's a non-binding side matter, right? The report as it stands.
Okay.
And so what the DA and the EFF are arguing is that there was no actual vote in that committee on the final report. And so that is where the contention comes in.
So when Tembeka Nqaitobi says even the SARS commissioner gave alternative options to the VAT hike, I mean, give you a chance to have a sip of water if you want to. What does he mean by that? And when did that happen, just in this process of passing the fiscal framework, passing the budget?
You remember the argument of the finance minister is that he needs 13 billion rand, and he uses the figure of 13 billion and 13.5 billion rand to justify why the 0.5 percentage point increase has to be affected.
And just on the day when the fiscal framework was being voted on in the Dome in town, that was when the SARS commissioner made the announcement, didn't he, that SARS had been able to come up with billions of rand to try and sort of close that gap.
And so the ideological difference, I would assume, between the minister and the SARS commissioner is that the minister says they have to increase taxes to get more money, and we know that the SARS commissioner had previously said that that's not the best way to do it. In fact, what you need to do is to actively go and get more tax from people who are evading tax. And so that difference has been interesting, and the EFF relying on it, saying that there isn't real evidence that increasing the VAT hike would actually result in the fiscus gaining that 13 billion rand.
What it will result in, though, and that's not a matter that's up for discussion, is that it's going to worsen the cost of living crisis in the country. Let me give you a second to just gather yourself in. As we are tracking the story with Qaanitah Hunter here in studio, we see there on the left-hand side of your screen, these are live visuals coming to us from the Vatican City. We know that Pope Francis, who passed away just on Sunday, will be laid to rest this Saturday. And from tomorrow, his body will lie in state at the Basilica. And that will obviously last until his funeral service on Saturday. So that's a big story internationally that we're tracking for you. Qaanitah?
Thank you for that, Michelle. Live television. But going back to this case, I think it's important whether the court will say that, the finance minister must be interdicted and stop from increasing VAT on the 1st of May. But also interesting that the DA telling the court that this case is not about whether taxes are good or bad. That's not for you to decide.
Right.
This is not about you to adjudicate whether we need a VAT hike or not. That's for Parliament to debate.
Right.
They said what they are challenging in court is the process at which...
It's procedural.
Absolutely.
But yeah, I mean, either way, the argument by the SARS Commissioner stands. We should be going after the people who are not paying tax, right? And that's how we get that extra money that we need to close the gap in the fiscus. Because otherwise... the cost of living crisis, which we already face in our country, is going to increase. And obviously, we know who that impacts more than anyone else, and that's the poorest people in our country.
And Advocate Michael Bishop's telling the court earlier that there's no guarantee that this VAT increase will actually bring in the revenue that the finance minister is expecting, and saying that there are other ways to raise revenue, or the state should just cut spending, and that's the case of the DA all along. So it's quite interesting that there's a political dance happening as well as this kind of technical judicial process that is happening, and we know that while they're on the same matter, it's kind of a dual process going along, because where the ANC stands on this matter is that how can the DA oppose the same budget it's willing to implement in government?
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously the court isn't interested in the political dance, as we said. The court is interested in the procedural matters that got us to this stage. So that court case, that urgent application by the DA and the EFF, continuing at 1:45. And of course, we continue to track that story for you. Qaanitah Hunter, thanks for coming into studio.